Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Deal late Saturday night. This is, at least in my opinion, what college football is all about. South Carolina getting it done at home. The environment at South Carolina, specifically for those night games, Dale, that's bucket list. And I'll tell you what, they ain't much things higher on my bucket list than making it down for a night game at South Carolina. Phenomenal environment. Shout out to the South Carolina fans. But my biggest takeaway, and the takeaway we've been talking with the South Carolina team all year, is the ceiling of this South Carolina team is really freaking high. And this is a Texas A&M team that I'm not selling my stock on Texas A&M through the rest of 2024. This more has to do with if South Carolina plays their best football for 4 quarters, there's not really many teams that they can't beat across the country. We saw that tonight. It was going to come down to running the football. We kind of knew both teams wanted to run the football heading into this one. 144 rushing yards for Texas A&M to 286 rushing yards for South Carolina. That paints the picture. Want to get into some of our big takeaways from this football game. Now, before we do, and as always, South Carolina fans, let it fly in the comment section. Dill, you can let it fly at me. You took South Carolina. I took Texas A&M. And look, you can't doubt this South Carolina team at night at home. I've learned my lesson countless times against South Carolina. So shout out to South Carolina. Hey, and all the South Carolina fans that have been showing a ton of love to the boys. Appreciate you guys more than y'all know. It's a great fan base. We love talking this team. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, I'll give you the T-Box, man. South Carolina gets it done at home against Texas A&M. How we feeling?
I mean, I think you said it. And if LaNorris Sellers specifically plays a clean football game, I think you just kind of saw where this South Carolina team can be. I mean, you look at the two of the losses, LSU and Alabama. I mean, those are two games. If LaNorris Sellers doesn't make a couple of key mistakes, they probably win both of them. So, again, you kind of said it. Their ceiling's really, really high. And I think that specifically gets really, really high when LaNorris Sellers is playing a clean game. And, again, you don't see a wildly efficient passing night under 50% completion.
Look, I don't give a dang about the completion percentage when you're averaging 9 yards per pass, averaging almost 19 yards per completion. That's okay. I mean, you had 530 total yards against, again, one of the better defenses I think you'll see across the country. You can get the analytic nerds talking about efficiency. Give me the explosive plays. But more importantly, give me the game-changing plays from LaNorris Sellers. I mean, how many times in that football game did he change what could have been a massive negative play and turn it into, whether it was just a game for zero or whether it was an explosive play for South Carolina?
Well, and that's the big difference you saw from him today than what you've seen in the past. Like, again, there's been some games where he's taken those plays that can get a little chaotic, and he's made them more chaotic. And you, again, in that Alabama game, in that LSU game. But today, you're kind of right. I mean, he played a clean football game. And when I'm talking clean, it's not like maybe the prettiest passing numbers you'll ever seen, but it's a clean game in terms of what he's doing on the ground, not making mistakes, not turning the ball over, and especially not taking a whole lot of sacks, because that was the big risk I think South Carolina had in this game was, could Texas A&M take over and make a lot of negative plays? They just really couldn't get to a whole lot.
I don't think – I mean, I'm excited to see the final box score in terms of negative plays heavily weighted for South Carolina. I mean, they created significantly more negative plays than Texas A&M did. And again, a lot of it is on LaNorris Sellers just being a difference maker at the quarterback position. What excites me the most about this kid, and look, we knew it heading into 2024. We talked about LaNorris Sellers, super talented cat. We knew there were going to be some growing pains. We saw some of those growing pains early on in the season for South Carolina, but this kid is clearly blossoming. This kid is clearly maturing as he goes through this 2024 season. If he keeps getting better, you have a special quarterback. Yeah, there's things to clean up in the passing attack. No doubt about it. Consistency, throwing off platform. But if he cleans that stuff up, you're looking at a difference maker at the quarterback position. Quite frankly, you saw a difference maker tonight. Rocket Sanders.
He's back. That looked like the Arkansas Rocket Sanders.
That's kind of where I'm getting to. There were times where we saw glimpses of it. You could tell he was probably not 100%. That was 100% Rocket Sanders, and that's a difference maker at running back. If you get
and
that,
showing the ability and the explosiveness at the big ones when he had his shots to hit him, he was hitting them. He just looked a little bit faster. He looked a little bit more elusive. Like, again, he's run the ball pretty hard and like tough and physical. He's done all that kind of all year, but he wasn't hitting those big plays. I think today you saw when he got a shot to hit the big ones, whether it was in the run, whether it was in the pass, he was hitting those big ones. And I mean, that, again, those explosive plays South Carolina was able to hit, those were kind of the difference. And you look, Texas A&M wasn't able to get to a whole lot of that explosiveness. South Carolina, really led by Rocket Sanders in my mind, was able to be really explosive all game.
You look at, and I think we should also give a shout out to the offensive line. That's a Texas A&M. That's a defensive line that every single starter on the defensive line is going to be playing in the NFL probably next year. I mean, you're talking about legit some of the Nick Scorton. I mean, maybe outside of Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, like maybe the best edge rusher that we see in the country. South Carolina, again, that's another unit that, some growing pains. You were starting a true freshman at left tackle and Josiah Thompson. It seems to be getting better. Shane Beamer, that is, has recruited that position quite well. If you can get some development of some of those guys up front, again, it kind of changes how you look at South Carolina. And I think to wrap up the conversation on offense, Dill, we said the exact same thing 7 days ago when Texas A&M beat LSU. I'm going to make the same statement for South Carolina. South Carolina, to me, figured out their identity on offense. Like, look, it's going to look a little different. I mean, I think there were 3 catches that were by wide receivers in the passing attack. Like, it goes through the tight ends. It goes through the running backs. That's okay. If you can run the football on the back of a defense that's that good for South Carolina, you're going to win a lot of football games. And I feel like South Carolina kind of figured out what their identity, what their recipe to winning is on the offensive side of the football. I think it, again, special environment, special performance by a young quarterback, LaNorris Sellers. I don't think it gets much better. Now you flip to the defensive side of the football. You gave up one explosive play to Amari Daniels. One of the biggest storylines in this game was Texas A&M did a very bad job at dealing with LaNorris Sellers. Let him get outside the pocket. Let him extend plays. South Carolina, on the other point, Marcel Reed got loose a couple of times, but they were able to limit the amount of times Marcel Reed was able to hurt South Carolina extending plays and using his legs. That to me was, one of the biggest differences in this football game here.
And you look, I mean, Marcel Reed only had 46-yard rushing. That's on 16 carries and 1 hit for 20. So, I mean, for the bulk of that football game, they were obviously able to keep him in check. And I think that was, like you said it, I mean, people question, can Texas A&M keep going and be as successful as they were in that second half of that LSU game with time to prepare? Again, I don't know that that's necessarily something Texas A&M can't get to, but you saw South Carolina be very ready to play. I think this defensive coordinator, frankly, for South Carolina has done a really good job all year because you've seen, this team has been in some tough spots. This offense has put them in a lot of tough spots. They didn't do it today, but they've done it in the past. I mean, this is a really well-coached defense. They just don't make a whole lot of things easy. And again, they're able to create a bunch of high-impact plays, it feels like, every game.
Yeah, I mean, they created some tackles for loss. They created some turnovers, but they also came up big on some massive fourth downs that fundamentally changed the game. You talk about, some of the biggest differences we saw in this football game, like Texas A&M, 1 of 3 on fourth down in really, really big moments. Kind of the storyline. This game could look different if Texas A&M is able to pick up some of those fourth downs. South Carolina, we talk all the time about Dylan Stewart. I think the most talented, honestly, on Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams' level. If we're going to be quite honest, Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, they get a little bit more national media hype because they're wide receivers, because they're scoring touchdowns. I haven't seen a line of scrimmage player dominate the SEC as a true freshman in a very long time since what we've seen out of Dylan Stewart. Kyle Kennard gets a lot of hype too, and 2 very good football players. The guys on the inside, we knew they were really good football players, but don't necessarily get the attention. Guys like Tonka, TJ Sanders, absolute dude. All the same things we said about Texas A&M in terms of NFL talent on the defensive line. You're saying the same exact thing for South Carolina up front too, and I thought the interior of that defensive line had themselves an absolute day.
Yeah, and again, the way they've been able to build those lines of scrimmage up, because for a while those were so bad for South Carolina, it felt like, and you've just seen them really
Yeah.
build both sides of the unit. And again, the offensive line is certainly still coming along to an extent, but it is coming along. I mean, they're making such big, massive improvements, even just kind of like game to game. But that defensive line, I mean, they've really built that into an elite unit, I'd say. I think it's one of the better units in the conference. You certainly probably have the best edge rusher group in the conference. And again, I think we sleep a lot on what they have on the inside, kind of like what you said. So you look, that defensive line, it might be one of the best in the conference. And when you talk about like the long-term health of this South Carolina team, I think the fact that Beamer's getting those two lines of scrimmage right is really, really important because, again, they've had good players on the boundary. Their cornerbacks, their secondary, they've been putting a lot of guys into the league, but you didn't really see them growing those defensive lines. I mean, the way they've gotten that to the point they are at now, very, very impressive by Beamer.
Player development. I mean, yeah, it's recruiting trail, but it's also like player development. Like these guys are just getting good within the South Carolina program. I also thought the linebackers had themselves today, and quite frankly, it was probably the biggest difference between Texas A&M and South Carolina. Like Texas A&M's backers had some really bad run fits. South Carolina's backers had some really good run fits in some really big moments, notably Debo.
And another guy in Debo, like who again had some moments last year where you saw the raw physical talent, but would miss plays, be in the wrong gap, and allow South Carolina to give us some big ones. I mean, the way he's kind of developed into a really kind of stalwart linebacker that you can just down and down out really trust, not just kind of a highlight reel player. Again, I think South Carolina, I feel like there are some naysayers against Shane Beamer. I think when you look at the trajectory of this program, the amount of energy that's in it, I don't get those people who, again, are going to look at the wins and losses and be like, oh, he took a step back in 2023. It's like, I mean, you see where this program's going. I don't know how you can necessarily be a naysayer at this point.
I mean, for most of these seasons where he had winning seasons to start, like he was out coaching the talent. You know what I mean? Like there was some work that needed to be done with the talent of this roster. And I think he's done a really good job maximizing those players. And yeah, maybe a step back in 2023, but like the line of success, I'm going to sound like a spokesperson here. It's not always linear, but it's clearly going in the right direction. I don't think you can possibly argue that. The energy that's around this program, it's special, I guess is what you term it. Quick note on Texas A&M before we sign out here. Was really confused. One, I'm not out on Texas A&M. Like Marcel Reed is a redshirt freshman that has not played a lot of football. You're looking at two really talented quarterbacks, and I think what you saw was he came into that LSU game. LSU clearly was not prepped for Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed was able to have a lot of success. He's going to have some growing pains when teams are able to prep for Marcel Reed and not Connor Wigman. It's a completely different quarterback, completely different offense. On defense, for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why they were sending so much pressure, not just by LaNorris Sellers. I mean, heading into this game, you probably feel pretty confident that you could get to LaNorris Sellers with 4, spy with the linebacker, but instead you're firing these linebackers, then nobody's sitting there and spying. LaNorris Sellers able to kind of rip you apart, extending plays. This game came down to who could create more negative plays and keep the opposing offense behind the chains. South Carolina was able to do it. Texas A&M had plenty of opportunities to do it. Now, in Texas A&M's defense, like LaNorris Sellers, that he's a big athletic guy to bring down, but if you wanted to win this game, you had to capitalize on some of those moments. They just weren't able to. South Carolina was. That's all I got for it. We'll probably dive a little bit deeper into this game early this week. Appreciate you guys rocking with it again. Special environment, special game. South Carolina fans, let it fly in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Talk to y'all later. Peace.